Anne-Marie, and I'm joined today by Laurie Carpenos. And Laurie is a qualified marriage and relationship therapist. She's a coach, a consultant, a facilitator, a writer, and she was an art teacher before meeting Sydney Banks in 1985. She's been involved in community health projects, and she also runs the Mystery School. So welcome, Laurie. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's really nice to be here with you. And thank you for inviting me to join you. You know, we were talking a little bit before you hit the record button, and the title that you have for this program just really struck me, because I was reflecting, well, what can I offer that's going to be beneficial for anybody listening that has to do with remapping our lives? Because, you know, I'm sure, I know that you and anybody listening runs into people who are dissatisfied. They're holding themselves against other people's. Oh, you know what? I realized that's my phone. I'm so sorry. I didn't take it off the hook. I'm thinking, where's that noise coming from? It'll stop momentarily. So what I realized in reflection was that remapping is something that happened to me. It was nothing like I wanted to remap my life. When I was dissatisfied and unhappy, I wanted to change things. And in fact, it's a good metaphor, I guess. I actually decided to leave where I was living on the East Coast. I was in Boston, Massachusetts. And I had this idea. At the time, I was an art therapist. I had been an art teacher and then an art therapist. And I thought, you know, San Francisco, California, that's the place that I should be. That's a place that will accept art therapy. It's going to be wide open. So I went to AAA, and I'm like 25 at the time. I go to AAA to get a map. I'm going to drive cross country by myself. I would never think to do that now, but back then that seemed like that was the way I could remap my life. Literally, in AAA, they pull out a map, they take a highlighter, and they map out my route. And at the last minute, I heard from a friend of a friend that their friend was also doing the same thing at the same time. She was living in Boston. She was from Iceland, but she wanted to go to San Francisco. She had different reasons. I don't even remember what they were. But we had separate cars, and this was before cell phones. Somehow we made it to California together. That's a long story. That would be another whole webinar. But my point about this is that in my search, that's not how things changed for me. Things changed when I actually stopped searching. So, and I have to say that, you know, thank heavens for Sid Banks, for what he uncovered. Thank heavens for the people who were learning from Sid, because even when I first heard Sid, I was a real skeptic. And I thought, well, you know, and I read Second Chance, and I thought, well, nice story, but over the top, went way over my head. I did not get any philosophy of life from it. I just got nice story. And luckily, I heard people like Bill Pettit say things like, well, you got to read that story again. And maybe even again, and maybe even again. And I'll tell you, with each reading, I saw more and I uncovered more. And I stopped searching and trying to remap my life and trying to change things and do things. So what I reflected on remapping my life, I saw it as it's not a doing. Just remapping, to a lot of people who have not been, or maybe anybody who's not been exposed to the three principles, may come on this webinar and think that I'm going to give them instructions on, 7 habits to follow, or 3 principles to follow. And lucky for us, we're in this conversation about the 3 principles, not as things to do or things to follow, but as understanding, having an understanding of how these principles work to give us an experience of life in every single moment. They're already working within us. It's not something we turn on. It's not something we do. It's not something we follow. It's something to understand how it works, how we get this inside out view of life. And I'll tell you, I've been around this for 30 plus years. Bill Pettit reminded me, because I'm taking his course, and he reminded me that we met 35 years ago in Florida, the only place that was offering any kind of training in what, at that time, the best of what people heard from Sid. And everyone was trying to find a way to share what they were seeing. But they were also, back then in 1985, and Sid, in the kindest way possible, pointed us in the direction of spirit, formless spiritual energy. That's what the 3 principles bring forth through us, through the power of thought. And that's the missing link in the world. People are looking at how to change their thinking, how to change their experience. But that's outside in. It's looking in the wrong direction. You want to turn your eyeballs around. And that's what changes everything. That remaps life. I mean, essentially, I have the same quantity, I don't know how to express this, but I'm the same person with the same kinds of things in the world. It's not about changing location, which is what I thought, well, if I change my location, that'll remap my life. If I change my job, that will remap my life. If I find a better boss, that will remap my life. None of those things, even though all of those things happen, but none of those things remap my life. The remapping took place when I stopped trying to change things. And what I heard from Sid was to look at what is, to appreciate. This is how I translated it. This is how I heard what Sid said. To see and be grateful for what is. Because whenever I was expecting something different or something that what I thought of as better, I would be slam dunked. I don't know if you know that saying. I think, yeah. Yeah, that's a saying not just in America, but also in other parts of the world, in the UK, and interesting. So, yeah, when I went after things to make things happen, even after I got wind of what what was going on in the three principles world. For instance, I knew about Modelo. Some listeners have read Modelo. It's a book that Jack Pransky read about the Modelo housing project. And Lloyd Fields is a social worker who was a social worker, during that transformation of that community project that took place in a lower income housing project. And so later, after I'm back in Connecticut, this is like in '94, I'm back in Connecticut, and Lloyd was in New York. So Lloyd comes out to Connecticut, and we're going to start a community rehabilitation project in Hartford, Connecticut, which could really use some help. So literally, Lloyd and I, if we run into each other, that's happened, I think, only once at a conference since then, we'll laugh because we were literally running on the streets of Hartford trying to catch up with the resident, the resident manager or director. She was the director of the program, and we'd get to one place and the people there would say, oh, she just left. She went over here. And we'd run through the streets to find her over there. And at some point we realized, what are we doing? If this was a project for us to be involved in, it would not be this difficult. And that's what I found throughout life. I mean, this is crazy because I have either co-authored or authored 3 books now. I never had that on my to-do list. That was never, ever something that I had any interest in tackling. All 3 of those books landed on my lap. And it was one of those, it was a project like, okay, I feel like a servant of mind with a capital M. Divine mind. Okay, this is here for me to do, and I'm the scribe. I'll take care of it. And that's been like miraculous for me in my life to get off of being on my back, being on my own back, trying to run the show. And I'll tell you, that was my first insight. And I didn't even realize it until after the fact. I had a huge effect from whatever Sid was talking about, which is always the same thing. We're taking this formless energy and we're bringing it into the world of form through our ability to think. It's an amazing gift. It's an amazing power. And we have free will to use that power in a way that's going to be helpful for us and other people, or in a way that's going to not serve us well. So I had an enormous effect from that first talk I heard of his. And after the fact, I realized that effect was relief. Enormous, huge relief that came in the physical form of huge tears, big, big tears that were not sad tears. They were more like release and relief, because I had been on myself, not realizing it. I had been on myself so much to make things happen, to make the things happen that I think are supposed to happen. And then, through the years, I would hear things like surrender. Well, again, what does surrender mean? That didn't strike me, because to me, surrendering is a doing. Even allowing has some I don't know, to me, even the word allowing seems like it's something we're supposed to do. But seeing, and you know, in mystery school, we make a big point about, or we talk a lot about, it often comes up in our conversations about how Sid would write seeing in all capital letters. That just seeing and having some understanding that this world is amazing and beneficent. You know, I can't find any better word than that. But for what the human mind, really the human brain, creates, you know, like we have the free will, the ability to create a symphony or create the atom bomb. I mean, that's enormously powerful. But I find that when I use my state of mind as really the most important thing, because, and I'm not always going to be in a great state of mind, but I'm going to be in better state of mind if I don't get upset that I'm not in a great state of mind, right? You know, so we go up and down. But when we go up and down with an understanding that it's coming through us, and it's just where our thinking happens to be in the moment, that's how we are as humans. So it passes a lot quicker. When I don't get down on the fact that I'm having a bad moment, when I don't get anxious about the fact that I'm having a bad moment, it's a moment. It's not an hour. It's not a day or a week or a year, which is what life used to be like before it got remapped. It got remapped is the best way for me to put it, that through understanding, through seeing more what is behind life, that it's amazing. You know, and I work with couples a lot. I work with individuals also, but, you know, and you can certainly see how individuals, once they begin to see more their complaints about the outside world and what the outside world is doing to them, decreases. Because, I mean, there are things in the outside world that, you know, we scratch our head and we wonder, how can these things happen? How can these, you know, the terrible things that people are starving and people are at war and people are killing each other and people are killing themselves. I mean, we're not Pollyannas. We know that bad things happen. But if we have a clear mind, we'll see how we can help. How can we help? How can we? And if we can help, upsetting ourselves is not the answer. It's not going to help them and it's not going to help us see a way to help. So the remapping happens on its own. I mean, that to me is remarkable because, I mean, that's how nature remaps on its own, right? I'm looking outside now at my window and there's a flurry of leaves because it's fall here in Connecticut. And it looks like, you know, the dance of the leaves. Well, nature knows when it's time to drop leaves. It knows when it's time to sprout leaves. It knows when it's time for the first buds of spring to pop out of the ground. How does that work, right? I mean, we can depend upon that. And that's the same force that we can depend upon within each one of us. Wow. Wow. I mean, just having this opportunity to talk about this with you, sends me into a feeling of awe, how fortunate for us. And, yeah, like Sid said, nobody gets through this life without their bumps and bruises. It's a contact sport. Life is a contact sport. Yeah, I had a flood. Second one, and the first one was my fault. Second one was, long story there, but it got cleaned up, and in fact, insurance paid for basically a new kitchen. Remarkable, right? But this one, somebody was watering a lawn, and it had fallen over. The sprinkler fell over, and it came through my front window, and I was away. I didn't know this was happening. But that got taken care of too. Stuff happens. And we just see how to take care of it when we're in our right mind. I know that before I had any understanding of what that meant, or before I even knew that there was such a thing, that every human is equipped with a right mind, wisdom, call it divine mind, tapping into the ability to tap into infinite intelligence. And, just a little aside, like life, history, even stories I had read in Reader's Digest years ago, I don't even know if that still exists, but will support this understanding. Like I once read in Reader's Digest that this amazing story of the conductor of a train who saw something on the tracks, and he didn't know if it was a bag. It looked like it could have been just a bag. And so, if the train ran over a bag, it wouldn't be a big deal. Or could it be a dog? And he tried to put the brakes on, but he could see that the brakes were not going to work in time. And in case it's an animal, he just, well, what was on the tracks got saved. And I'll tell you what was on the tracks in a moment. It's like a little too dramatic to let you know now. Want you to know that this man was interviewed by, I don't remember, a news station or something, or a journalist, and the person interviewing him said, well, how did you know to put your foot out the door and kick this away? And he said, I have no idea. I have no idea how that happened. But that was not something my brain told me to do. I know that much. That was, I don't know, what do you call it? Instinct? He did not know. People wanted to call him a hero. Do you know what that was? And that bag, dog, animal was kicked to the side and not only survived, but there was not a scratch. It was a baby, a human baby. I mean, miracles like this happen all over the place. I'll bet anybody listening to this has an inkling of what I'm talking about, has had some kind of experience like that. I mean, anybody on the call now, and it is because I see, Anne Marie, you're shaking your head. Anybody have any experience like that? Because I'm realizing I'm just talking on, and there may be a question or a comment that, because I love to have interaction also, and not just hear myself talk.
I know what you mean. I'm just sorry. I was just going to say, I know what you mean. I'm just struggling to think of an example for my own life. I can think of examples where things have happened in my favour, but it's not quite as dramatic as that. But I can give you an example of my own life. So when I came across the three principles, was shortly after, well, about a year after I had a nervous breakdown and was off sick for 3.5 months off work. And while I was off sick, I had the insight that I needed to leave my job. And I went back to work after 3.5 months, still wasn't happy, things weren't great. And then in 2019, I turned 50. And that year, they were offering redundancy. Do you call it severance in the United States, where you're given a package to leave your company?
Yeah.
But along with that severance was also, you could start claiming a pension if you, at the age of 50. So I turned 50 in May, left the company in the end of November, and managed to pay off my mortgage using the redundancy payment, and also could claim a pension straight away, which meant I didn't have to worry about getting a full-time job anytime soon. So that's my own experience of something. I feel like it was universal mind having my back, you know? So that's what comes to mind for me.
Oh, that's a great story. Yeah, that's a great story. So out of the ashes, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? You know, that you had a moment. I mean, I would call that, I don't know, would you agree that that nervous breakdown gave you the opportunity, an opportunity that provided you with an opportunity to get quiet enough to hear true wisdom? Like, this is not the place for you to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not a nurturing place to be in. And so you acted. Yeah. That's a great example of what I'm talking about. And sometimes it looks like, oh my gosh, a nervous breakdown, isn't that terrible, awful, horrible? Well, you know, like, I love this phrase that I learned from Dr. Pettit. It's a love letter from the universe, right?
It's a beautiful way of putting it. Yeah, I haven't heard that, but yeah.
Yeah, that the worst things, we think we have this idea, or society has this idea that, you know, oh, that's really bad, or this is really bad. And that really bad thing can actually provide us with the opportunity, bad thing, can provide us with the opportunity to quiet down. And now we know, through the help of what Sid uncovered, these three principles, and now we know to pay attention not to what we're thinking when we're in a bad state, because what are we going to be, what were you thinking when you're in a bad state? I imagine you were thinking, oh, I hate this job, it's just terrible, how am I going to keep going? I can't handle it anymore, it's killing me, blah, 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 right? But if we just quiet down and, you know, but for grace go I. That could have been me for sure, Anne-Marie. When I think about my past and how I would blame my difficulties on the outside world, you know, I could easily have had a nervous breakdown. Thankfully, I guess I met Sid in time, right? 1985, I met him in time. I was only like 30 something. Yeah, late 20s, something like that. I don't know. I'm not going to do the math now to make me feel too old. But isn't that something that now we know that we don't have to suffer so much, that the answer is always quieting down, quieting our mind down, so that we can hear wisdom, and wisdom spoke to you. And then you realize, holy cow, there's all these things I can do. There's assistance available for me. I don't have to suffer. Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's something else that comes to my mind that people, or at least I didn't realize, that's for sure. And to this day, I mean, 30 plus years of being around this conversation about the principles, and being involved in mystery school, where that's what we're talking about. We're talking about our insights from Sid's books and his recordings. I'm still getting insights things I didn't see yesterday, and certainly didn't see even a year ago. So how does that happen? It happens, I think, for what Sid said, you'll never come to the end of seeing wisdom. You'll never come to the end of understanding how the principles work. That it's so miraculous. So what I'm seeing more and more is that as people stop blaming the outside world, and that's just second nature, what the brain does, because the brain sees and hears out there. And society has really, how should I put it, has taught us to look outside of ourselves. It has, in so many ways. It's just been the prevalent thinking for a very long time. But that prevalent thinking is beginning to shift. So when I work with couples, they inevitably come in and they will be blaming each other. Well, if he gets better, if he settles down, I'll be able to breathe easy. Well, I'll be able to love him more. If she behaves this way or that way, I'll be able to love her more, and I'll be able to give her what she wants from me. Some rendition of that. It's every single couple. And I have been in this field now really since 1985. And in private practice since 94. So when each individual, and it's the first chapter in The Secret of Love, if you it's not a matter of fixing yourself. If you settle down yourself, because we don't need fixing, we just need settling down, your relationship changes. If you find love and understanding, your relationship changes. Yeah, it's amazing. When people have a remapping within themselves, their relationship remaps. That to me is really incredible. And that's why it's called the paradigm shift, because my field, when I was in graduate school, I don't know what they're teaching in graduate school now, but when I was in graduate school, that was that was what we learned. That you have to fix the situation with a technique, with a something that's external to fix things. And things remap and get fixed on their own. They go in a better direction when people settle down. And, if you've heard of the story of Chip and Jan, they were one of the first people we interviewed when we started interviewing people in the Three Principles community for the Secret of Love book. They have a perfect story about that Jan saw this well before Chip did. And she was, she didn't fall prey to his upset. even though he kept his upset going, she just knew that her well-being was the best she could do for Chip. And he came around. He came around. And eventually, it's really hard to continue your negativity when you're around somebody who's in a nice state of mind. And after a period of time, you can't blame it on, well, she's faking it. He knew. You can feel when somebody's in a nice state of mind. They're not faking it. They're not acting as if. That was prevalent when I was in school to learn how to be a therapist. Act as if. Honest. I'm not making this up. And it'll change then, because that was the prevalent thinking outside in. You have to do something. You have to behave in a certain way. Behavior modification. And, it's interesting that those things, maybe they work for a time. And I know that you've interviewed other people who have said the same thing, that it worked for a time, but they never felt such an enormous remapping before they started listening to Sid and listening to other people who had learned from Sid. It's really such a miracle that we live in a time. Of course, will it be incredible when we get to the time when it's hits a critical mass and this becomes prevalent thinking, and that's called the paradigm shift. According to Dr. Pettit, by the way, in this course, he said he cited a book. I don't remember the name of it, but or the author for that matter. But the author had looked at paradigm shifts and throughout the history of humanity, and discovered that most of them take place in 50 years. It takes 50 years. And Bill pointed out that we're at year 48. I mean, we'll have a different world, obviously, right? The world will just be so different. So how are we doing for time? And let's see if people have any questions. Wow.
I think we have 20 minutes. Has anybody got any questions, Sharon or Xander? Anything you'd like to contribute?
Time sure flew, didn't it?
No,
Yeah.
I've thought of something. So I'm just interested. You started off as an art teacher. Do you still do your art?
Say that again.
You started out as an art teacher.
Started out as an art teacher. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Started as an art teacher. I wound up at a conference, a three principles conference, and Jack Pransky came up to me and he said, I hear that you were an art teacher. Do you want to help me with this book? The Safer Society Press asked me to write a book, a curriculum for 7th and 8th grade. And, so that's how I co-authored the first book. Because I had a reputation, I guess, of being an art teacher. But what was your question around that, Anne-Marie?
I just wondered if I know you said you started as an art teacher. I wondered whether you still were into art as well, or whether you still did drawings or paintings or taught around that in any capacity.
No, I really don't. But you know what I wish I had here? It's in my basement. I'll have to do this sometime. I cleaned out my basement recently and I came up with some of my old drawings. I mean, my way to express myself is now writing. I love to write. Drawing never really was my thing. My parents thought I was talented, but isn't that funny? So they also trained me to think this way. They were innocent. They thought, this was the prevalent thinking back then. Well, you'll have children, so you want to be a teacher so that you'll be home when your teacher are home, when your children are home. Well, that's not what happened for me. And that's another whole webinar. But so yeah, so I uncovered this drawing. Scary, scary, scary. I'll explain it. And on the back, it said 1983 was when I drew this. I was depressed. I was super depressed and did not know the extent of it. This drawing was like of a figure, a female figure, a naked female figure that was emaciated on her knees with a big black hole, black, like black, big black hole in the middle of her body. That was me. Yeah, I'll have to have it in this space so that when I do another webinar, at some point I'll pull it up for people because it is scary. The next year was the year that I met Sid. And I never, ever, from that moment, I get sad for about 10 minutes. Maybe that's the extent of how long I'm sad. And I had one Prozac. I never took medication because it wasn't even created back then. But when I moved to Connecticut in 1994, I worked for a psychiatrist who had, what's it called? Samples of medications. And he gave me a Prozac. I had just gotten divorced. So I was a little sad about that, I mean, I'm sure I was pretty sad about that. Not to draw a picture like that picture that I drew 10 years previously. So he gives me a Prozac. I fell asleep at the wheel, but it was the wheel like coming out of my driveway and I hit a tree. It saved me. It wasn't a big tree. It was a little tree that, I needed to fix the car and it woke me up hitting this tree. And from that moment on, I said, I don't know if it had to do with the Prozac, that I had some kind of weird reaction to it, or if it had to do with the fact that I wasn't sleeping because I had just gotten divorced, blah, 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 but who knows? But I can tell you that, what I heard from Sid Banks was such a natural, the most natural thing, right? I mean, there's nothing harmful in reading a book or listening. Listening is not just to Sid, not just to, someone who learned from Sid and has great metaphors, and not even, but listening to our own wisdom. That's the key. And there's something about listening to Sid that brings out our own wisdom, because people just tend to have lots of insights. Yeah. So anybody listening, they can get in touch with me and join us in Mystery School. It's such a fun way to investigate and go deeper. Yeah.
Put those details when I put this onto YouTube on the description so that people can click a link and get to it quite easily. So a couple of things you've said just now and also on a previous video I watched where you were talking. So it just struck me when I was at my lowest ebb, it was the next year I came across the 3 principles, and you've basically just said the same thing there. And another thing you said on a previous talk that you gave, I think it was 2 years ago on YouTube, was that I think you said you went to see a therapist when you were about 40 and you were bemoaning the fact that you were childless and single at the age of 40.
Yeah, I went to a Jungian analyst in San Francisco in my 20s. After that was the search. I went to California. I thought that would do it. I was diagnosed with dysthymia, long-term depression. That's what that means. And nice person. I really liked her as a person. But what I can, that was 4 years of Jungian analysis. I feel like Woody Allen. Yeah, it was Woody Allen who was in analysis for many years. And that was right before I heard one talk of SIDS. I mean, wow, what a blessing! What a blessing that was to have been invited to hear Sid speak. Yeah, it was really something. Yeah, and what I learned in the 4 years of Jungian analysis, which I thought, wow, that's sexy to be in Jungian analysis. That was what it felt like to me. I learned that all these things and people outside of myself to blame for my state of mind, because my mother said this, but it was never mentioned that my mother said things that could very well have been misinterpreted by me. Like, did she mean the things she said that I took the way I took? If she did mean them, she was in a really bad state of mind when she said them. That's where love and understanding comes in. To realize that if people knew better, they would do better. Anybody who sees and knows something better, their behavior is better. So, did that answer? Kind of a roundabout, Anne-Marie.
Yes, I was just thinking, yeah. I was just, when you're talking about your mother, I was just thinking of a insight I had around my own mother when she was saying to me fairly recently, within the last year, you don't know how to look after yourself. And I'm like, what do you mean? I don't look after, no, I don't know how to look after myself. I'm in my 50s, I've got my own house, I paid off my mortgage, I've done it all on my own. What do you mean I don't mean to look after myself? I went on a bit of a rant with her, and she responded by saying, I mean, I'm your mother, it's my job to look after you. And I'd never seen it like that before.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. So what do you make of that?
I suppose it's because I thought it was, I took it as a personal attack at the time until she explained that, oh, it's my job to look after you because I'm your mother and it's what my job is to look after my daughter. And I never thought about it like that before. I thought it was interfering. It was saying I can't look after myself, treating me like a child.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? See, that's what I love the term psychological innocence, right? Isn't that a great phrase to explain your mother's behavior? Like, people do the best they can, the very best they can, given the information that they have, given how they see things in that particular moment in time. Somebody was just telling me, was it Alan Flood? This happened in one of the mystery schools. Yeah, I think it was his mother. Oh, wow, I can't remember. But very similar story. Very similar. Yeah. I'll have to ask him. I'm sure it was such a similar story. Yeah. That actually, at the end of her life, she had a realization that really shifted things. That was a big eye-opener for him. Sorry, I can't recall it now. It's easy to recall our own stories, and that's so easy to recall other people's, right? But it was a beautiful story. Yeah. Yeah. Do we have time for any last question?
Yeah, I was just thinking we've got, is it 7 minutes left? So I don't know whether anybody's got any questions or comments from the last nearly 55 minutes.
Comments are good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really have a question. Okay, I was just saying it's a pleasure to meet you, Laurie. And
Thank you.
I'm actually reading Paradigm Shift. Oh, you're not going to be able to see it.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Which mentions the I've just started reading it recently, which mentions the Modelo. I'm only in the first section. The is it the George Pransky interview with, is it the Pranskys or is it the Pettits? Anyway, the interview. So I'm only in the first part. I've still to get to the Modelo part, and then there's a third part, I believe. But yeah, it's a pleasure. I've met some of the people that were involved back then. Marty Lipsky, I met him recently, online obviously, and Bob Campsall was running about then. So yeah. I don't know if they were to do with the Florida stuff that was going on in Florida, but I don't know. I just thought I'd come on and say hello, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, well, thank you. Where are you?
This is a green screen, if you can't tell. So that's not really where I am. I'm actually in Northern Ireland. I'm Scottish, but I'm in Northern Ireland. So
nice.
A tiny speck in the map compared to, the Americas, but there you go.
Well, I'm so intrigued by how people run across it or the three principles. Do you want to share that, how that happened for you?
Is that okay, Anne-Marie, host? Well, I had my own paradigm shift probably 2012, and it was just a big insight. And I found out about the three principles. There was a group started through the meetup.com locally, and it was their second meeting, and everything just, I went along. It was their second meeting, and my wife had just died in the June 2018, and when I went to that meeting, they were talking. I knew exactly what they were talking about. It just made so much sense, and I wanted to fight it. I wanted to fight it because I come to from 2012 to 2014, 15, I had come to my own understanding of this, through non-duality, basically. So I had that understanding. So it was the same thing, just packaged differently. It was, different language almost. But it all made so much sense. And no matter how much I tried to pick holes in it, it couldn't be done. So I'm still here, and I've just got my certificate as well. That group, the facilitators of that group ran a 3 principles coaching and facilitation course, and I was on that and just got my certificate. So yay me.
How wonderful that you were open. That's also part of it, that you were open to seeing something. And like you say, truth is everywhere. It's everywhere. The thing I love about the principles is it points me to the truth. So I'll hear it from a 2-year-old, but I hear it from that 2-year-old because of what I know about, for me, it was the 3 principles that helped me understand, because I had read a bunch of spiritual books in my early 20s, And I didn't get through most of them. You know, things with titles like The Dancing Woolly Masters. Wild titles. Yeah, I should go back and read that now and see if it makes sense to me. But yeah, I find that everything is explained through 3 simple principles. It's unbelievable. I don't have to read all these other books now. You know, I would for fun, but it's not like I have to. I can be with a 2-year-old and get as much from that time spent. It's interesting. I'm so glad that you're on this journey with us. Yeah, it's great.
Me too.
Yeah.
What occurs to me is when you talk to a 2-year-old, they don't have any of the contaminated thinking that we get as we become adults, where all these things have happened to us and we blame the world. Well, some of us blame the world for all our problems.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I certainly did. I sure did. Yeah. Yeah.
I did have one insight when you were speaking, Laurie. Is this okay if I come back in, Anne-Marie?
Yes,
Yeah.
certainly.
I did have one insight, and I sort of, as I was listening to you, it occurred to me, I tried to say this a couple of weeks ago at one of our meetings here in Belfast, and it came out wrong, but you reminded me of it. And what it was is that we look at the 3 principles, and it looks like everything has to be about finding solutions to problems. And it doesn't. It just doesn't have to be that way. It's not really about finding solutions to problems. It's about living in the moment. It's about allowing.
Well, you're breaking up. What just happened?
I don't know. How's that? Is that better?
Your voice is gone.
Oh, I think it might be your end, Laurie.
Can you
'cause I can
hear
hear. I can hear him. I can hear him. It might be.
Maybe it's
end.
me.
Is it your headphones?
Nope, I got a solid green, but I'm not hearing you either, Anne-Marie.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Must be me.
Okay. I'll put something in the chat if you can't hear me then, and I'll just say we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry about that I didn't hear at the end there, but
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
I
you can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
I was just going to put something in the chat in case you couldn't hear me at all. I was just going to say, well, it's the top of the hour now anyway. Shall we call it and say thank you for coming and goodbye to everybody?
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's great.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Laurie.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.